Hey everyone, Joseph Shapiro here. Thanks for joining us. Really excited today to hear about what's going on in Missouri. Um, as you know, Sarah and I are co-founders of Psychedelic League, and we're grateful, like every week, to have someone super knowledgeable in their own area to share with us what's going on. There's so many different areas, and we're really appreciate you joining us. Eapen, Sarah, do you want to take it?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, totally. So I had the great pleasure last weekend attending Grunt Style Foundation's first integration event. It was a really great event where they had health practitioners, alternative health practitioners, plant medicine practitioners from all different realms kind of coming and presenting. They also invited our guest today, Eapen Thampy, to come and share a little bit more about what was going on from a regulatory legislative standpoint in Missouri. I had the great pleasure of hearing Eapen speak and figured we'd bring him on to sort of share what they've been working on and what's kind of coming ahead in the coming session. So, Eapen, I'll let you sort of introduce yourself a bit and share how you kind of came to this space.
Yeah, I'm a registered lobbyist in Missouri. I work with a company called American Shaman out of Kansas City. They're a company that started in the hemp and marijuana industries, but they have a big focus on opiate reduction, and that's part of what has brought them to pharmaceutical psychedelic discovery work. Also work with the Grunt Style Foundation, the good folks. They're like Will Wisner and Tim Jensen, um, and their colleagues at the Veteran Mental Health Leadership Coalition. So we've been looking at pathways to pass legislation both here in Missouri and at federal level to create legal psychedelic access in the Missouri and the United States. So I actually got interested in this subject during high school. Um, so when I was in high school, there was a debate topic that uh, included a Fourth Amendment topic, and that ended up having a lot of war on drugs cases because the drug prohibition has been very damaging to the Fourth Amendment privacy protections that we have in the United States, and so that was kind of my introduction. And then during college, got to know uh, a friend of mine who's local to Columbia, Missouri, named Mike Hagan, and he had a radio show on a local NPR station or um, local, community radio station. And over 20 years, he had like practically every psychedelic luminary on his show, including Terrence McKenna, the late great Terrence McKenna.
Wow, very cool.
That understanding things from his perspective and just the knowledge he was able to share was incredible. And then I was in Denver in 2012 with their marijuana campaign, and a lot of the visionaries in drug policy were involved with that. So if you were in drug policy in 2012, you're either in Denver or Seattle for the marijuana campaigns, and so and a lot of them were really in Denver, but I got to meet a lot of folks there, and there was a conversation happening then of the marijuana thing is great, but the plant medicine modalities that um, we know of have, there needs to be a conversation about that. So that's where I think a lot of the conversations started, politically speaking. Then in 2015, I was back in Denver and I met with Matt Kale. He was a military army veteran who had ended up moving to Colorado for the marijuana, but he had discovered the potential of psychedelic medicine to really help military veterans who had a number of chronic ailments, including PTSD or traumatic brain injury. And so Matt had a bunch of connections in Missouri, so he began visiting with us here in Kansas City, and we began organizing in 2016. And so it's been a little over 8 years that we've had a movement here, so to speak. We did our first public fundraising in 2020. We did we had our first bill introduced in the Missouri General Assembly in 21. This year, this legislative session, we had psilocybin legislation get approved at different times by the House and the Senate. Unfortunately, it's more of an issue of navigating the process than it is the politics at this point. So I'm optimistic we get something passed on a governor's desk in 2025 or 26. I would hope. So
that's the people, the legislators themselves you're finding them receptive to this legislation?
Yeah, the first time we had legislation filed, it was and we got hearings. There were a lot of people who were very skeptical, who were making jokes saying that we were trying to promote dangerous drugs. But over the last 2 years, I think the conversation has shifted. First, you've had
Oops, I think
University Lewis, who has. Hello?
I think you froze for a second. Yeah, sorry, you froze for a second there. Just if you back up about 5 seconds.
So yeah, we have a really strong presentation of clinical data. Really strong team at the Healthy Mind Lab in Washington University in St. Louis that has been doing some excellent clinical research. So having that expertise available to speak to lawmakers has been incredibly helpful. And then obviously through Will Wisner and Tim Jensen's leadership at Grunt Style Foundation, we've been able to really bring a lot of advocates from the veteran space, and that has been very powerful and very compelling. But we've also had great advocates from first responder communities, including law enforcement and firefighters and other trauma-impacted populations. And we don't really have good therapeutic options for a number of things like PTSD or traumatic brain injury or even alcoholism that these psychedelic modalities can address in a powerful way. So, plus simply the fact that you have to, in many cases, leave the United States to access things like ayahuasca or other therapies like this. Ibogaine has begun making a big presence in the conversation as well with its applications to opioid abatement. I would say that we've largely won the argument from a policy standpoint, but as you all probably understand, passing good legislation isn't about policy, it's about power and how you can leverage power. So, we're hopeful that in the next year or two, we see the things fall into place to actually put legislation on a governor's desk and see things in Missouri move forward.
That's amazing, and it's really heartening to hear that you're winning people over effectively just with good information, because that's how it should be, right? You don't need to win anybody over with rhetoric; it's just good information. So then, right. What kind of structure, legislative structure, for what kind of program structure are you thinking is going to be the strongest to get through? What do you think would end up on the governor's desk? What kind of program?
Well, next year we're going to look at introducing 3 distinct proposals. First would be like a regulated psilocybin access program. We're looking at some of the ideas that other states have proposed to kind of flesh that out. But I think it would have to have a strong component with a lot of regulatory guardrails. You need, I think we will see requirements that these therapies be facilitated by licensed healthcare professionals, doctors, nurses, licensed master social workers, among others. The second thing we'd like to do is get a legislation proposed for psilocybin microdosing. I mean, this is happening anyway. There's probably tens of thousands of people in Missouri who are growing their own mushrooms or have some kind of access. And particularly with microdosing, there's not the really the potential. I mean, there's not a lot of data, good research data, but there does seem to be some basis for the idea of microdosing. So we're looking at I talked to Josh Capel in Denver at Vincente. He's the founder of the Microdosing Collective. So we're looking at some of their ideas on putting out a microdosing bill. And then the final thing we're doing is we're proposing to allocate some money from Missouri's opioid settlement fund for clinical protocol development for clinical trials for Ibogaine, working with Brian Hubbard, the former Kentucky State Treasurer and chairman of their Opioid Abatement Commission, on that issue. If you're watching this, you may have seen headlines last year when Kentucky proposed to put $42 million into Ibogaine research as a opioid therapy abatement tool. Unfortunately, that proposal got killed by the new attorney general there. But Brian Hubbard has been taking this proposal to other states. Ohio's where he's probably most engaged on this right now. So, but we see the Ibogaine therapy as a powerful way to help America exit the opioid crisis. The problem, of course, is it's a Schedule I drug, and so initiating clinical research on it is incredibly important. So if we can, Missouri can help fund that through some dollars from these pharmaceutical opioid manufacturers who, that's probably the route we're going to propose next legislative session.
That's so interesting. I love how you're approaching three different issues, which are all, you probably can't get all those issues into one bill. I mean, that would be a lot to ask. So you got to divide and conquer, right?
The Ibogaine proposal, that's going to be a budget item. The psilocybin regulated program and microdosing proposal, that could be one bill, that could be two. I think in New York, they proposed this kind of like individual psychedelic license where you take a 5-hour course or something, and you are licensed to use it as an individual, use and provide psychedelic therapies to other adults. And that seems like a reasonable model, but we'll see if lawmakers bite.
Yeah, we've spoken, Sarah and I, with Allison Hoots about that legislation, and it's obviously to people who are interested in psychedelic legislation, the kind of the most straightforward, efficient way to go about it, right? Self-regulated way to go about it. As you may know, here in New Jersey, we're a medical proposal that's going on. It's a kind of medical gatekeepers within a service center model like Oregon. So it's like Oregon, but with kind of a therapeutic bend and with necessary physician or other service provider referrals. So what, Sarah, I don't know if did you have a question?
Yeah, I do actually. I'm curious, what was the bill in 2021? What did that look like?
So that was kind of like our, shoot for the stars, hope we hit the moon kind of proposal. It proposed decriminalization of personal possession. It proposed legalizing all psychedelic therapy modalities through this kind of regulated service center model. Of course, it went absolutely nowhere. But it set the stage for committee hearings in the next year after that, and that's where we really saw some understanding develop in the legislature.
So if you had to do it over again, would you do it the same way? Just do a big, coming out kind of piece of legislation to get the conversation going, and then retool from there? Or would you do it in a more nuanced approach?
Yeah, I mean, the most important thing 4 years ago was to socialize these ideas. Get them start conversations, and then you never, with a big idea like this, you never see that really get fleshed out 100%. As time goes on, it's you kind of see people saying, "Hey, let's take one step at a time." And we kind of saw that, between 21 and 23, we went from let's provide access to all psychedelics to let's start with psilocybin. That's easy. That's well understood by most people. Mushrooms grow all over Missouri. We have two native psilocybe species in Missouri, one in South Missouri and kind of the in some of the swampier, wetter regions, and in North Missouri and some of the more drier pasture type conditions.
Cool.
People understand mushrooms, or at least the idea of mushrooms. So let's start there. So that's been well received, and if we can implement some kind of real framework there, um, that'll provide a template, hopefully, for approaching other psychedelic therapies, in the next 5 to 8 years. And I think it's important to understand the role that states have to play here, because while we do have investigational drug applications with the FDA on psilocybin and MDMA right now, I believe, it's going to be 5 to 8 years before other psychedelic therapies are really um, close to a point where the FDA might examine them for final approval. Even though there's data, I mean, we have 50 years of data on LSD and peyote and mescaline and ayahuasca. But I mean, it's going to be 5 to 8 years before that any of those medicines are even close to FDA approval. So, providing access through state-regulated service center models, I think, is important to, I mean, just for access reasons, but also to kind of force the hand of federal regulators and make them, and also Congress. One of the things I've been proposing to some of the federal stakeholders who are involved in things like the Breakthrough Therapies Act. So the Breakthrough Therapies Act is a great idea. It says that it's a bill in Congress that says if the FDA says this drug is a breakthrough therapy and it's a Schedule 1, well, the breakthrough therapy designation will automatically start a process to move it to Schedule 2, at the very least to accelerate the research component. And I think that's a great idea. But I think the conversation I'd like to have is like, look, Congress made these scheduling designations by legislative fiat in 1970 when they enacted the Controlled Substances Act and sent it to the president's desk, right? Congress should just undo what it did. I think a easy, proposal would be to have, just file a bill that says Congress is going to move these psychedelic therapies from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, kind of like ketamine is. Ketamine's a Schedule 3. So I see that as, I like that idea a little bit better than the Breakthrough Therapies Act, because the Breakthrough Therapies Act assumes the involvement of a bureaucratic process at the FDA and DEA. And I'd, as much as possible, to accelerate the research and development of these therapies, I'd like to, short circuit that as much as possible.
Well, you made a good point, the point about the importance of state-regulated models, because we saw an article or a news release recently following MAPS is the FDA, the decision regarding MDMA that impacted MAPS, that MAPS itself is now going to start focusing on state-regulated access. And you kind of couple that focus in light of how kind of treacherous the federal route can be, and how much opportunity there is in the states. So you have all this opportunity on the state level. And then you couple that with the fact that state-regulated models are having major impacts, like cannabis rescheduling, the decision to reschedule was actually greatly impacted, we understand, or at least substantially impacted by the observational data that was collected on the federal level, collected from the state level, for application on the federal level about whether it should be rescheduled, whether it's safe. And you see the majority of states having cannabis programs, and things are still running, people are still alive. And so that, this, is it safe? What data are we seeing that it's not safe? And you're not, and that's, so I think what we're going to see is the same thing perhaps with psilocybin. You'll have these programs and each state will take one at a time. And at some point in the future, maybe it's the same time horizon as, you had mentioned bringing on other psychedelics in a rescheduling, but like you might be talking years still, but down the road, we're slowly building a case for rescheduling of these drugs, which are already breakthrough therapies. Like psilocybin is already a breakthrough therapy available to people where treatments haven't worked. So why shouldn't it be rescheduled? But it's bureaucratic, like you said. So I think you just got to start working. I think that's the allure. That's the benefit of state regulated models. You can actually start doing work, and we can all start doing work now, like we're doing. Like you're doing an amazing work in Missouri, and people elsewhere across the country are doing the same. And hopefully, we can just keep coordinating. Because you had mentioned those resources that you had access to put in front of your legislature, and we'd love some of those too. So if you could share them, please do.
Yeah. The Controlled Substances Act defines Schedule 1 as a classification for drugs that have no accepted medical value and high abuse potential, right? And one of the things that we have seen through the Biden's administration's initiation of the rescheduling process for marijuana is a acknowledgement that these state marijuana programs and the tens of thousands of doctors and nurses who are authorized to recommend marijuana, that has the federal government has now recognized the existence of those physicians in these state programs as a component criteria that says this does have accepted medical use. That was one of the really interesting things we saw from the Health and Human Services agency report that involved input from the FDA and the National Institute of Drug Abuse. But that was one of the really interesting things that we saw in the last year with this rescheduling process, is that acknowledgement. So that was really important.
I'm looking, sorry, Sarah, I want to let you have a question, but I also have these great QR codes that we loaded up here, and I have Psychedelic Missouri and great state strategies. But I'm going to, so as they come up, next time they come up naturally in conversation, I'll put some of these QR codes up so people can see what you're working on. But Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah, so
go ahead. Please.
You have to draw a straw now. Like,
well, I'll go ahead and toss out kind of shifting a little bit to what you're looking ahead to in this coming session and the next set of bills that you guys are proposing. I'm curious, can you dive a little bit more into the more regulated use that it sounds like it's going to be a similar medical model that you guys are looking at? Would you compare it to what's kind of going on in New Jersey? Is it going to be with a therapeutic intent, meaning must be as in New Jersey's law, it says a qualifying condition or symptoms of, which that symptoms of is a nice big caveat. But is that the path you guys are going to go down? And what?
You would have to have a diagnostic criteria, and I think you capture, for instance, the language we've worked with in the last couple of years here, PTSD. I think the biggest catch-all is addiction, because if you have if you're addicted to alcohol or you're addicted to opiates, or there's usually some underlying trauma issue there, but using a criteria like addiction is pretty good catch-all to include as many people as you can, or chronic pain. Psychedelics, as stimulate a lot of healing of cortical nerves and neurogenesis. So as well as a reduction in systemic inflammation, which all have a lot of therapeutic power for chronic pain issues.
And microdosing, that's the one area where microdosing seems to be the most successful, not so much the mental health aspect, but I believe there's quite a bit of evidence around chronic pain and microdosing.
Yeah, yeah.
And so this bill, is this through psychedelicmissouri.com or is
So
this, talk
Psychedelic
about that?
Missouri is just our website. And I've through that, I guess, box, we've we started doing public conferences in 2021. We did a full day conference in Columbia, Missouri that year, and the next year. Last year we did St. Louis and Kansas City, which are obviously Missouri's population centers. Um, so we would, and this is just a vehicle for us to, do some public outreach and coalition building through. Now, our friends in St. Louis, a couple, two or three good folks that out there have actually incorporated a nonprofit to kind of accelerate this, grassroots development, public education facing front. And that's under the psychedelic St. Louis banner. So they have a 501c3 nonprofit filed for that. So, um, you know, hopefully we, as we kind of expand, our presence in terms of organization, and all you really have to do is connect the people. The interest is already out there, especially on a professional, competent level. You just got to find everyone and introduce them and have them start talking, and things will kind of start happening organically there. So, um, yeah, that's kind of the focal point of Psychedelic Missouri.
Yeah.
We have two conferences this year, one in Kansas City, November 9, right after the election, and one in St. Louis, October 26, right before the election. So we'll have, a variety of speakers and presentations. And, last year we had about 150, 200 people show up on each side. So hoping to maybe see,
Great.
yeah.
Yeah, Sarah and I were talking to each other yesterday in advance of this call and said, like, is it possible? Can we get out to Missouri for this? Because it looks like a great conference. Looks like a
Yeah.
great event.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, coalition building, as you mentioned, it has been super important because you have to put the best foot forward, right? And that's what we're learning here in real time. Is who is your best foot forward? And as you had mentioned, generally is veterans and first responders because they have the most immediate need in a lot of ways, and they're as far as their character is concerned, it's kind of a very bipartisan. Nobody can. It's a bipartisan. It makes it more of a bipartisan issue.
Right.
It's not very partisan it's not a partisan issue to help veterans.
This is 0% a partisan issue. There's no room for partisanship here. This is a, patient rights, individual freedom, issue. I'd kind of even point, during the Trump administration, one of the biggest successes I think that we saw get enacted was federal right to try expansion. Right. So the right to try law initially, was um, a framework for experimental access to experimental drugs that hadn't finished clinical trial, which, as you all know, federal FDA clinical trials can take, 5 to 10 years and involve $500,000 to $1 billion worth of expenditures. And for many years, Americans have had to leave the country for things like cancer drugs, going to Cuba or China or Eastern Europe for access to experimental drugs that were not available through FDA regulated pathways in the United States. So, the right to try framework is a very powerful framework. In fact, there is a strong argument that it should already create access to psychedelic medicines, and that's actually being litigated in the Ninth Circuit by my good friend, Dr. Sunil Kumar Agarwal at the Advanced Integrative Medical Institute in Seattle, I believe.
Yeah,
He's provide psilocybin to terminal end-of-life patients.
You know, we were lucky enough here. My former co-chair of the Psychedelic Committee of the Bar Association and I to represent some doctors as amicus, part of the amicus cohort in support of that and in support of that appeal. And so yeah, we've been watching the attorneys argue it, and we actually had Dr. Agarwal, we had Sunil come on our subcommittee and talk about that. Um, Probably a year or two ago, and it's great to see. Yeah, so I love this is the thing that I love about this area, psychedelic policy, because everybody kind of knows each other. Maybe one or two, people were apart, and we kind of all you could start to close the gaps, and before long, you kind of feel like you know a good portion of the people in it, which is great. It's
Yeah.
exciting, you know,
Yeah,
and
I met Dr. Agarwal several years ago, actually over a decade ago. He was at NYU Langone, and at the time, he was like one of the 3 or 4 Indian Americans in drug policy in the United States, and I was one of the others. And so it was a very small world. Obviously, in the last decade, that's broadened substantially as more people just become educated and become comfortable talking about these drug policy issues.
yeah. Well, and so tell us about Great State Strategies. I can put this up so people want
Just
to
my
find you here.
lobbying firm. So I work with former Missouri State Representative Ron Hicks. Ron is a retired Republican state representative out of St. Charles, Missouri. And over the years, he retired from public service in 2022, and this year we made it official. We've been working on these drug policy issues for a long time, and he's has a background in military contracting and law enforcement, and with his legislative expertise and experience, we really have, I think, some, you know, we think we can actually pass some bills. So, if there's folks out there who want to support that, they retain us, and we we do all the legwork and get bills filed. We get organize witnesses for hearings, organize coalition support, media. Um,
It's so important. I mean, because we're learning, as passionate as the coalition, as the psilocybin coalition that's organized here in New Jersey in support of this bill, as passionate as everybody is, or they are, it's everybody has limited bandwidth,
mhm.
and so you need someone who's pushing it forward, so it's super valuable. You need somebody wrangling. Um,
Yep.
yeah, so we've seen that firsthand in legislation that's going on here in Jersey. Um, and so, yeah, and especially going back to the earlier point about this being a bipartisan issue, especially um, having someone who's served on the other side of the aisle, you know, as it were. I think it's really strong to have someone who's conservative, right, in support of this, because it's I think traditionally it's thought of as like a kind of a liberal issue, right?
Well, I mean, the uninformed, naive perspective might be, oh, this is a issue that liberals are behind. But I mean, the reality is, I mean, look at you got people like Congressman Dan Crenshaw, Congressman Morgan Luttrell, both Republican members of Congress from Texas. Um, you know, um, I remember meeting I'm not going to say his name, but a former governor, former Republican governor of a Midwestern state. And we had the opportunity to have a brief conversation on this issue. And he said, if these medicines work, we should authorize them.
Mm.
Right. And, we were actually specifically talking about the ways in which psychedelic therapies might be helpful in combating the opioid crisis, which is a crisis we have no good solutions for. Right. Um, we have a opioid crisis that was created and enabled in many ways by governmental actors and uh, private pharmaceutical companies, right? So we got a generation of Americans addicted to opioids, and now the pharmaceutical companies are saying, "Oh, we have these maintenance therapies like Suboxone or buprenorphine or these or methadone, right? And these are therapies where you have to be on these drugs possibly for the rest of your life. So, um,
Yeah, I think it's funny. That's a common thing that I keep hearing, but it's interesting because it is such a myth. It's something that's in everyone's mind of like, oh well, anything, pro plant medicine or pro fungal, it's always there. Everybody thinks it's always left, and I'm like, you all don't understand. This is both sides. Everybody, as you see, like I've heard this said recently, like trauma doesn't discriminate. And doesn't discriminate by party lines. It doesn't discriminate by race or any other marker. And we all have some of that, sitting behind us. And so, like, these plants are for all of us, and it seems that there's support for that on all ends.
Yeah, the other thing is great skepticism of big pharma. I mean, that's just something that everyone intuitively gets. We're skeptical of the entire pharmaceutical industrial complex, and the idea that, especially for religious conservatives, the idea that God put these medicines on earth for mankind's benefit. That's something a perspective that you hear particularly in conservative Midwestern states. But certainly a fundamental factor that has really accelerated the acceptance of these ideas.
What have you heard what have you in your experience seen as being the most compelling testimony when you got in front of a legislature, right? There were some hearings you had mentioned that you've gone through. You've gone through the rounds already. What were some of the things that stuck out to you at these hearings as like the most compelling moments, and how would you suggest that other states advocates, other state regulated program advocates try to recreate those?
You need two fundamental things. One is just a good presentation of clinical data. So you need a MD or a PhD to really, be able to talk about this. In Missouri, we've leaned on Josh Siegel. He's a MD, PhD, just left Washington University in St. Louis. He's now working at the NYU Center for Psychedelic Medicine. And he's a brilliant presenter. So that has been very helpful. And then the second thing is you just need some really compelling witness testimony. In Missouri, that's been veteran groups primarily, but not exclusively. But veterans have, I think, a powerful political position in terms of just being able to make demands on these structures of power, right? And these are obviously people who've sworn an oath and sacrificed their bodies to serve our country and protect and defend our country. And the fact that they come home, damaged by their service in some way, and the only thing we can do is shovel SSRIs and opiates and these other zombie dope, pharmaceutical pills at them, is leading to some pretty horrific outcomes. I mean, the veteran suicide crisis is escalating. We lost more veterans to suicide in the last 20 years than we have in combat. And so being able to help present that kind of political demand, I think, is very powerful.
That's a powerful stat too, because in essence, essentially by serving, those are casualties of fighting. It's just a different version of it. And so how have you wrangled these people? What's been the most effective way to find, for instance, veterans? Is it just outreach in the community? Are you using connections? Because I'm asking for selfish reasons, in part because here I'm based in Jersey and Sarah's based in Denver, but like here, and we're working to do what we can in our respective states. But right now in Jersey, we have some hearings that we expect to have coming up in the coming month or two, and we have kind of, as you said, had an MD lead off with some of the data, very compelling. data. I don't think we've seen, we've had a first responder who's had compelling testimony. I don't know how much we've had by way of compelling veteran testimony yet.
Well, I'd just give Tim Jensen and Will Wisner a call, because I'm sure they have some connections, organizational connections in New Jersey. Especially now, I think you're seeing some of the larger veteran service organizations like the American Legion and the VFW really look at this, and I think that they may be coming out in an advocacy perspective soon. I would also look at the Veterans Mental Health Leadership Coalition. That's a group, vmhlc.org, that has this coalition has like probably 50, 60 veteran groups and first responder groups, Navy SEAL Foundation, Brain Futures, Cluster Busters, literally dozens of veteran groups. And it's founded by former retired Marine 3-star General Martin Steele. I also know Jesse McLaughlin there, and Adam R. from the Warrior Angels Foundation. But those, somewhere in that list of coalition members is a group or several groups that have connections in New Jersey and may have a lot of utility in helping you expand your advocacy profile.
That's great suggestion. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what will be interesting, because there's a lot happening on the state level, and that of course is driven a little bit more by New Approach. A quick question on that: is New Approach working within Missouri?
No, not that I'm aware of. Not that I'm aware of. I'd certainly like to talk to Graham Boyd again, but I don't know if they've really done anything involved or gotten really involved with us yet.
Yeah, so I know that there's a lot of, they're kind of the force behind, the bill in New Jersey. And so, once that, there's a lot of resources moving towards that. Although interestingly, I joined the coalition call this past weekend. Yeah, there is not, in any of the hearings, there's not been a veteran, although there is a first responder here, probably familiar with Cluster Busters, Joe McKay. He's a lovely guy with a beautiful and compelling, powerful story. But I'm, kind of looking a little bit beyond, the bill passing. It's how do you speak to the municipalities, which is a lot of our work with Psychedelic League, is, how do we help them understand the power of this? Like, they're being handed down something from the state, and how can we help them also be receptive? So I feel like these same resources that are valuable on a state level are going to then, we can kind of like turn them on towards the municipal level. So yeah, anything, I'll reach out actually to Will and Tim and see if they know of anyone on the ground in New Jersey, because we have some interesting plans. Joan and I have a meeting tonight for the municipal education, and having that story and having that information, I think, would be really valuable. So it sounds, do you have any experience on a municipal level, and do you have any
a little bit
like wisdom to share?
Your all situation in New Jersey, I think, is somewhat unique, because you do have that more decentralized municipal layer that doesn't really exist so much in many other states. It seems like municipal actors have a lot more power in New Jersey than they have in most places. So, I've worked on some municipal issues in the past here in Missouri, Kansas City, Columbia, St. Louis, Chillicothe. But typically when the state here passes a law, the municipalities, just have to, they're limited to, okay, well, zoning and maybe local sales tax, but they don't really have a lot of influence beyond that. Whereas in Jersey, municipalities have this extraordinary power compared to most other states.
Well, what I want to highlight there, though, is it's the kind of seemingly innocuous, the zoning issues, time, place, and manner. But what we're finding and what we're hearing in Denver what we're hearing in Colorado right now is that despite there being a really broad legalization that's happened, you're seeing pushback by towns. And I think it's partially it's because the towns, they're not part of the legalization process. The laws passed, then they have to comply by essentially not disallowing, by allowing effectively these businesses to open. But that doesn't mean they do it willingly or they do it graciously. So
Right.
like,
So in
yeah,
Colorado,
yeah.
you had a ballot initiative, which by design and by intention, a lot of these ballot initiative proposals circumvent a legislative process where you might have municipal stakeholders involved. Right. That is a defect of, in my opinion, that's either a defect or, depending on how you look at it, a benefit of a initiative process.
Hmm.
Whereas if you're going
Yeah,
through the New Jersey legislature, those stakeholders do have opportunity for input and criticism. Um,
yeah,
Obviously, the problem with in Jersey is you have just like really strong political machines. I mean, I think right now the scandal with George Norcross is still fresh in everyone's minds, and the absolute lock that some of these power brokers have on your all's municipalities. Um, that's a consideration that you have to take in Jersey. I think that doesn't exist in most other states.
What's interesting, they actually, we were talking just last week when we were just talking with the land use attorney, because there's a lot of, especially in the cannabis space, there is,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of stuff happening around that. But in this bill, they actually say that the city cannot tax nor charge additional fees to these businesses or on these, any sort of psilocybin product. So it'll be interesting to see how that might be at play when there's no carrot being sort of offered to municipalities.
yeah, and it's because the concept is that these municipalities could maybe tolerate, some of them who don't want it, they can tolerate it by putting in restrictive zoning, time, place, and manner restrictions. But our goal is to try to get ahead of that. And so even though legislation is far from done here in Jersey, we're already working to reach out to the League of Municipalities and to towns individually to try to get them to understand, like, listen, this legislation will probably, if it does pass, it will mean that you're going to be approached by people who want to open businesses within your borders. Here's why you might want to start considering keeping in your minds for the future why that's beneficial, and then warming them up. And so that's we really think that there's a missed opportunity to not approaching towns even far in advance of legislation passing on the state level or ballot initiatives, whatever the case may be, because I think once you get buy-ins from the towns, it'll ease the process. We saw so much litigation even with legal cannabis in New Jersey, even through a legislative process. You still have a ton of litigation because the towns kind of get it wrong. They don't get enough education. So
Right.
that's really what Psychedelic League is all about. Is making sure that the towns are there's some kind of groundwork laid, because there are these groups of coalitions of towns, and if you can tap into a coalition of towns, every state seems to have a league of municipalities, as it were.
Right.
And I'm not sure if Missouri might have one, and to the extent that they do, it might be worth approaching them, now, and say, we're working on this. It doesn't affect you immediately, but in the midterm, it might, the mid to long term, not the short term, but like maybe in a year or two. So let's
Mm-hmm.
start a conversation now. That's kind of the reason for Psychedelic League, really.
I was kind of thinking this through yesterday. I don't know where this kind of came from, but I mean, I think if we're able to really illuminate like why a municipality would want one of these businesses and available to their community. I mean, how awesome would it be to where they are court rather than businesses, as we spoke last week, businesses courting various municipalities. What about municipalities courting wanting this so bad in their town and available to their first responders, right? That
Right.
they're the ones courting businesses to come to their area. Like, I think with the right education and um, the right way of delivering this information, like we can create that environment where they want this. It's not just, are we going to allow it?
Right. Right.
Um, so what's your next step in where are you again, to recap where you are in Missouri, and what should we
Well, it's
expect to be hearing?
campaign season, so we got to get through November, and in November we'll kind of take some assessments of, how we can advance the issue in 2025 and get some legislation filed. We can pre-file in December, and then we go back to the Capitol in January, first week of January, and start the process. So, right now we're just in a kind of educational outreach, fundraising mode, and we'll switch to the nuts and bolts of the process in, mid-November.
And I don't think we touched upon this much, but if you want to, Sarah knows about Grunt Style, and I know you said you're working with them. What's Grunt Style's current aim when it comes to psychedelics and
Provide access to these modalities through whatever legal pathway possible.
got
So
it.
they're, pretty serious about the issue. So they're, we definitely wouldn't have been as able to influence this process as we have without their input and participation.
Amazing. Well, thanks for jumping on. I really hope that you keep us posted about what's happening, the next first quarter of next year, and see. I'd love to see an early draft of what you guys put together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And if there's anything that we can do to support, or anyone who might be in our network, or anything that people who might be listening can do to support you guys, we'll make sure that we have up Great State Strategies, Psychedelic Missouri, and any other way that you feel like you can be supported.
Yeah, absolutely. If we can, like right now, our primary fundraising push is through our, conferences and working with Grunt Style to help support their work as well. So, and there was a couple other veteran first responder nonprofits that we are supporting. So we, try to funnel any, financial support through some of those groups. And I would love to have you guys come out to St. Louis or Kansas City here in about a month or a month and a half, and see if we can loop you in with some of our advocacy work. That'd be great.
Yeah, we were kind of speculative. We were talking about that yesterday. We said, let's look at our calendar. Let's compare calendars. Can we get out to Missouri? Can we get out to St. Louis? So fingers crossed. We'll see if one or both of us get out there. It'd be great.
Yeah. And I'll send out a post on LinkedIn also with information on the conference, like specifically, see if there's any reach that we can help increase for you guys over there.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, wonderful.
Awesome.
Well, thanks again for jumping on, and we'll hope to talk soon.
Appreciate it.
Take care.
Take care.